Oh my god, I know what you guys are thinking. Is Stu actually going to review and analyze a movie that's currently in theaters right now? The answer is yes. I went and saw Guardians of the Galaxy 2 on my birthday with my wife. I know it's been out for a little while, so maybe this is still outdated, but whatever. It was the first movie my wife got to see since she had our son, so it was a good treat for her. I'm going to do my standard thing that I usually do, which is I'll have a review at the beginning, and then I'll have analysis to sort of follow that with a little bit deeper insights into what works and what doesn't work about the movie. Overall, I enjoyed the movie, and the things that I think most people are going to enjoy about the movie, regardless of what sort of perspective you're coming into the movie with, is I think you're going to enjoy the spectacle of the action scenes in particular. I would classify this movie as a space fantasy or a space opera. Yes, I know it's in the Marvel universe, but it's sort of really not a superhero movie at all. It's really like space opera or space fantasy. It's extremely fantastical. It's very much about space travel and those sorts of things as a backdrop to a bunch of fantasy elements that happen. In fact, I would say, like, if you want a great example of something that could be possibly so over the top, I can't think of anything else that could be more over the top. It'd probably be Guardians of the Galaxy 2. The special effects were great. The CG was great. The battle scenes were great. All of those things were very, very stimulating. I've talked about stimulation versus tension. They were stimulating, and they also did, have a sense of tension to a lot of them, particularly towards the end of the movie. They were able to kind of draw out the conclusion of things and not replace just explosions for worrying about what's going to happen. And they even did it with a ticking time bomb, which was effective actually in this particular movie. The sound design, a lot of people are going to like the sound design. I thought it was okay. Still, I feel like this has just been a kind of a current trend, is there's been a tendency during the loud sections of movies to sort of maximize the volume in a way that you're not hearing a lot of the individual things pop out and kind of hit you. And to compare that to like an older Star Wars movie, where the sound design, when you have a blaster fire, it's significantly louder than all the other action that's around it and the background music. So it really has a bigger impact. There's so many explosions and there's so much happening, you end up with kind of just this roaring, blasting sound during some of the action scenes, but it's not too bad, and there are quiet moments. The other thing that you may like or dislike about this movie is it's really, really heavy on the pop soundtrack. I usually hate pop soundtracks personally. That means I don't like popular music as soundtracks. A lot of people like them though, and they tend to be pretty effective for a lot of audiences because people tend to have emotional connections with those popular music songs that they've experienced elsewhere. So it tends to be a pretty good little technique for a lot of things, although I don't prefer it. However, this popular music soundtrack I didn't really mind that much, and it's not because I like the music. I think it's just because they chose a lot of songs that were genuinely good and genuinely well done and genuinely used semi-appropriately, in some cases used in a way I didn't like. But pop soundtracks in other movies are usually full of music that I actively dislike, and so that's what makes me not like them. In this case, it was just music I don't love it and I don't hate it, but it's okay, it's good, and so it works. If you like that kind of music, it's classic rock, it's a very classic rock focused pop soundtrack, then you're probably going to really enjoy this movie for the music that's in it. In the same way that I enjoyed Deathgasm because it was all about black metal and death metal, right? So different things for different people. However, if you're not super into classic rock, I don't think this will upset you because I think the song choices were done pretty well. The story overall is pretty effective. There's a pretty simple A-B-C story. The A story is, who is Star-Lord's dad? Turns out it's Kurt Russell, and he's Ego the Living Planet, and so they have some good reveals with that, and I'm sorry if I gave you some spoilers there, but luckily that doesn't come too far into the movie. And then the B story is a little bit of a love interest story, and the C story is just this idea of the group operating kind of as a family and finding belonging and redemption as well for a couple of characters. That's kind of the C story. Most of those worked pretty well. They did pull some of the punches and make basically a villain in the movie. And I won't. I'll get deeper into this in the analysis portion. But they make the main villain in the movie extra evil, kind of needlessly towards the end of the movie. I talked about it with my wife, and she said, "Yeah, they really needed to do that for me to feel okay with really not liking him. So I think it was an active decision. Not my favorite decision. I thought that kind of weakened the effect of the decisions that the characters had to make at the end. But, that could go either way. So overall, I like it, and I would recommend it for anyone who's looking for a space opera adventure with like lots of crazy special effects, lots of explosions, and a big element in the movie that I think actually functions pretty well is the comedy. I'd call it like a space opera comedy. Maybe I'd put comedy in it. There's a lot of comedy in this movie, and a lot of it sticks. A lot of it doesn't stick, but for me, that's the same in any comedy. In any comedy, you're not going to hit every single joke, but in this one, I think they were pretty effective in landing a lot of the humor, especially from Dave Bautista's character, who really is because they have established in the previous movie that doesn't understand metaphor, so he just kind of says what he thinks all the time, and it's a good funny effect. It's a really good technique, because sometimes we think that stuff and he just goes there and says it, and so it's pretty effective with that. Of course, like Star-Lord is cracking a lot of jokes. It's kind of like in a lot of these Marvel movies, you have people that are just always, the main character's always like a joke cracker. They turned Iron Man into like a joke cracker, but it works because it lessens the tension and it makes you sympathize with that character a lot. So overall, that's what I think about it. Let's dig into some of the analysis portions of the story. So you have a couple of interesting things in terms of the way that they constructed the order of events in the movie. So the movie starts off with this little prelude scene of a de-aged Kurt Russell. I don't know how they did it. Maybe they did it digitally. Anyway, he looked young. He looked like he did in the 80s. It was pretty cool. And he's, there's a classic rock song playing, and he's talking to this woman about, he shows this alien plant, and that's how you know, like, oh, something's weird about this guy. He's like, this is going to spread out all over here. And she's like, oh, it's amazing. And you kind of get the idea that might be, that might be Chris Pratt's character's dad, right? And so you get this idea of that kind of at the get-go, because that was something that was a question from the previous movie. And so, actually, before I talk about, I'll talk about this in a second. So, but then they follow that with another music-based scene that's there to sort of reintroduce all the characters. It's a scene of like all the characters battling like this interdimensional beast. It's to get everybody from this team called the Guardians of the Galaxy on screen, have them display some essential aspect of their character, one after the other, and then begin the next series of conflicts that they're gonna drive the plot. And the reason that two music-based scenes, pop music-based scenes, one after the other, it was a little bit jarring, and they could have done it differently. But what they had was they're trying to set up a stereo to listen to music while they fight, which everyone they even are making fun of the setup in the movie. And because we have those two songs kind of stuck together, we have like this baby Groot dancing while things are blowing up. That's just a little bit of an odd decision. Now, overall, one of the things about this movie that I think makes me give it much, much more leniency than what I otherwise would is the fact that it does not take itself seriously at all. Versus something like Star Wars, which takes itself very seriously, so when it really fails or there's like a cringe moment in Star Wars, it's really annoying. And Guardians of the Galaxy, they'll do like bad devices and point out that they're doing them, and that to me, there's just kind of like a little meta level of humor where they're kind of just bringing you in on the joke of like some of the bad movie making decisions they're making, like kind of while they're making them, which makes you just kind of forgive them like over and over again. So like there's this part where they're like hooking up the stereo in the scene I mentioned, and they're all just talking about like, why are you doing this? This is stupid. Like this is not something we need to be worrying about. We're trying to prepare to fight this interdimensional beast and introduce all the characters to the audience right now. So why are we doing this? And it's like, oh, well, I thought you're the one who likes music. It's like, I do like music, and that's part of my character. It's like they kind of just come out and say it. They're like, we're breaking the fourth wall by telling you what we're doing with this particular scene. Just like every other movie will have the introductory scene to show you all the characters. You could think of like most of the like Star Wars episode 5, episode 6, you have a beginning section in the movie that sort of reintroduces all the characters and their attributes to them. And you have that in a lot of stuff. You have that with like Avengers, and it's a classic trope, and they just kind of like bring you in on it. even so, I didn't like the fact that they had the music like twice in a row. And they had like a little dancing baby Groot, and it was kind of like, that was cringy, but because it kind of winked at you about the cringe, it worked. After that, they have this scene that has a bunch of dialogue that makes that would not exist, where they fought off this interdimensional being and saved these super valuable batteries, and they're talking to this race of people called the Sovereign, and they're all like painted with gold paint, like from Goldfinger or something, right? And the leader of these people just starts having this conversation with Star-Lord, like about their mating rituals and about how they like genetically engineer their offspring and stuff like that. And it just doesn't make any sense, because they're just like, the Sovereign are like this, but none of the characters would, that they wouldn't explain that to somebody else, and none of the characters would ask the questions because they live in the universe and would probably already understand these people on a certain level. So it was one of these scenes where it's like, why are they talking about this? But you end up kind of forgiving it, because they kind of like wink at you the whole time while they're doing all this stuff. Anyway, that scene sets up the next set of conflicts, because you have the raccoon guy. I'm trying to remember his name right now. And I can't remember his name right now. But the raccoon character, there's like a talking raccoon as a character. He steals the batteries and lets the audience know, like, hey, I'm kind of still a bad guy jerk. I stole the batteries. And they repeatedly make fun of that character. Rocket. Rocket's his name. And they repeatedly make fun of that character over the course of the movie about what a jerk he is. And it actually ends up playing into his like character growth that happens towards the end. One of the things that I thought worked about the production values in general was they were always supporting the idea of like full over the top explosions all the time, and that also makes you just kind of like be okay with the spectacle and the kind of cheesiness of it, kind of like they're like referencing the 80s action movies while they do that stuff, or kind of like True Lies. If you ever saw True Lies, they kind of had like a kind of wink thing about some of the cheese factor there. So I talked about sound design. I think I explained that pretty well. The visual effects look pretty good. Generally, when CG is matched up with human characters, it's not too jarring, which it happens a lot with other movies where you have like CG and live action mixed, and there's like something off about those two mixing. It looks really, really good in this movie. Overall, it was one of the, I guess, best uses of CG that I've seen so far. And with their budget and with their studio, I'm not surprised. Let's talk about characters, setting, characters, plot. Setting is in space. It is the space side of the Marvel Universe. Thanos is a character. He's mentioned, but he's not in the movie. The characters fly through spaceships. They travel around the galaxy by jumping, and we don't really know what that means, but that's not important. What's important is the story. And there's lots of fantastical weapons. There's a race of the Sovereign race. They don't actually get in their ships and go fight people. They like remotely fly them, so that it's like a big video game to them. And that was actually kind of funny how they did that. The characters, now I think the characters in this movie were actually fairly well done in the context, especially comparing to the first one. The tendency with a lot of sequels is to bring the characters back to where they were at the beginning of the first movie so that they can then have the exact same growth arc again. It's a really, really common thing that happens, and you can see it in a lot of Marvel movies too, where they just kind of repeat what they learned in the first movie. They don't really do that in this one. Instead, what you have is the characters have developed to where you left off in the first movie, and then they're doing the next part of it. They never stop and explain that Dave Bautista's character doesn't understand metaphor. They just kind of go with it, and he's just funny because of it. They don't have also sort of these illusion, in the first movie they had this one scene that I'm thinking of in particular, where Rocket just has this emotional breakdown in the middle of a bunch of other stuff going on that makes no sense, has no relevance to the plot or the character, but they just needed to have like an illusion of character growth, an illusion of emotional impact happening. So they just had him have an emotional breakdown in the middle of stuff. In this case, he does end up having kind of an emotional breakdown at the end, but it's completely set up by the plot and completely set up by all the events that have led up to it. So it doesn't feel like he's just doing it for no reason. you actually feel like he's revealing a part of his character as a result of the story, and that was actually a big step up from the first movie. There was a lot less of the illusion of growth or illusion of emotion moments. There's still a couple of them, because the movie's pretty fast paced, and you got to deliver some quick one-liners to let you know how the characters are feeling. There's a lot of dialogue where characters kind of say what's happening rather than them showing what's happening, or kind of say how they feel rather than showing how they feel. But you end up, like I said, you end up kind of forgiving it because the movie doesn't take itself seriously and the characters don't take themselves seriously. No one takes themselves seriously, and so as a result, you just don't care that much when they do something that might be a little dumb or cringy. And half the time when they do it, they let you know as the audience that we're doing this dumb thing, and here it is. And so it ends up kind of just, I don't know. It's almost like they do the bad parts of the movie ironically, but looking at it, they couldn't. It's like, well, could they have done that better? And it's like in the confines of the movie, they had to do what they ended up doing because they just had to get to the next part of the plot. So they couldn't have done it better. So rather than do it better, they just said like, this is a silly thing we're doing right now. And it ends up working. I feel like the characters, the A story, which is Star-Lord's dad, I feel like that actually has, it's been set up well in the first movie, and it has like a meaningful emotional impact for the character at the end. We feel like that character has actually grown through that A story. The B story, which is a love interest, we actually feel like the characters involved in that have grown when they get to the end of the story, and that conflict it existed, and then it's actually properly resolved in a way that we believe at the end, which is really important. And then the C story, which is this, we're a group and we're friends, and anyone can have a place with us as long as they're willing to do sort of the right thing. And so there's a redemption of bad characters that happens in the third act of the movie that is, and there's forgiveness, that there's a forgiveness sort of story that happens there, and we actually sort of believe that the characters will forgive the other characters, even though in some of the cases. So there's I'm trying to remember the character's name, the green girl. I'm forgetting all the character names. I apologize. I don't do these off of notes, by the way. So her and her sister obviously like want to kill each other, and then like they gain some emotional understanding of each other. And we kind of rip roar through that. They're just like shoot dialogue at each other. It's like, Thanos used to rip off my arm and replace it when I lost you. And it's like, I was just a kid trying to survive. Da, 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 da. And they're like, okay, I guess we're okay with each other. And of course, like the planet's gonna explode, so we best get past this whole character conflict and on to not dying. And so that particular one happened a little fast, but it was set up early enough in the movie, because when they get the batteries, they also get this sister as payment. So it's set up really early in the movie that there's going to be a conflict between them. It's just like the resolution of it was just like rapid fire, so they could get to the final confrontation of the story, and that's pretty much how the plot ends up being introduced. It is like a standard, kind of 3-act screenplay. You have the A story, which is gotta find my dad, and then the B story sort of supports that, and then the B story helps resolve, and the C story is what actually resolves the A story. The C story of like, we're all, there's redemption and forgiveness, we all work together to overcome the big challenge. That is what ends up resolving the A story, because the conflict of the A story turns from who's my dad into my dad is totally freaking evil, and what do I do about that? And he's also epically powerful. So how can I stop him from doing what he wants to do? And overall, I think that worked. So I think it was actually a pretty good example of good movie making, and when it was bad movie making, you end up forgiving the bad movie making. The bad elements of this movie are like so much more forgivable than they would be in a movie that had a much more serious tone. If you saw these same things happening in Star Wars, and actually we did see them in like Episode 7, but if you saw them in any Star Wars movie, you'd be way less forgiving of them. than you would be in this one, simply because the tone is so different. There's a high amount of comedy in Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's one of the reasons that I think it is overall a success. So I do recommend it, and I think most people will find something good to get out of it, and it's probably one of the best visual movies I've seen in recent years. Yeah, so it's good. You guys have a great one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear. I do have a book coming out on July 7th. If you would like to help me out by pre-ordering that, link is down below. It's called The Water of Awakening. It is a fantasy novel. If fantasy is not your thing, that's okay. I appreciate you watching, and that's good enough for me. But if you do enjoy fantasy, consider checking out that book. If you want an advanced review copy, of course, you can join my mailing list. The link will be down below. Or you can send me an email, stu@dvspress.com, and I'll shoot you back eventually with whatever files you happen to need, or I'll give you a link to the file so you can get a little bit of early reading done. And that's great. I'll see you guys next time.